Welcome to the second Tuesday Photo Huddle where, you guessed it, we huddle up and talk about many things photo related, and we try to do it on the second Tuesday of the month. Now, as a reminder, the West Michigan Photography Enthusiast Meetup Group, which Second Tuesday Photo Huddle is part of, is sponsored by the Southwestern Michigan Council of Camera Clubs, SWMCCC, or simply SWMC. SWMC.org is our website, and our mission is to connect people who enjoy creating and seeing images. Check out the webpage for more events and connections to various affiliated clubs and connections. This time, we want to explore the images of smoke plumes, shooting smoke, that is. This is a fascinating subject because the resulting images tend to be abstract and open to the imagination and interpretation of the viewer. Rarely do you see two captures that are exactly alike. I had the privilege of working with Mike Mitchell on this project, and also the willing and eager to learn Dan Sack. First, we'll watch this short clip from start to capture as Mike sets up the shoot and works with Dan to capture some images. Then we'll break it down in more detail, and after that, Mike will demonstrate an edit of a captured image.
Okay, so it's really easy to do. Basically what you need is your camera with probably around a 75 to 100 millimeter lens. 85 to 100 millimeter macro lens is perfect for this. Second thing you need is you'll need your strobe. Okay, this I've got on a light stand. If you don't have a light stand, you can set it on the tabletop next to it. A lot of times you get these little feet that you put your shoe into it. The other thing what we're going to do is we're going to trigger this flash with a radio trigger. It's the cheap little radio triggers. The other thing you'll notice, we've got a nice black background because we want as much contrast as we can get between the smoke and the background. Okay, the other thing we're going to use here, you'll need some kind of light to focus with, okay? I got a dish here with little incense with little cones. That's what's producing our smoke, okay? So we set our light out here to the side so that we can focus on the smoke. We set our strobe off here, and this is what's going to actually light the smoke, okay? One thing you'll notice as we walk around here, things kind of swirl. We want the smoke to kind of come up, so we got to kind of let things settle down a little bit. You want to set your camera on manual, okay? And you want to set your flash on manual, and that gives us about F11 or F16. We want to be stopped down because the smoke, if you can see, kind of will move back and forth. The other thing too is autofocus give you some problems with smoke, so I tend to use manual focus, but because you'll notice that smoke will kind of move back and forth in this plane, and it might be way out here when you shoot, and you might not have enough depth of field if you're shooting like f8. So f11, f16 in that range is good. We're going to bring our photographer Dan in here in a minute. We'll give Dan the radio trigger. Okay, so Dan's going to shoot a few things. You notice we've got the smoke kind of going up nice and straight. Usually just where the smoke starts to swirl is a good place to focus in on because you get some really interesting shapes. The only thing is, don't do a lot of walking around or have other people walking around, because when you do that, it kind of sets up little breezes, and then your smoke goes all over the place. So if you get it to come off nice and straight off your incense, that's about the best thing. Now Dan, are you shooting manual focus or autofocus?
I am doing manual focus.
Okay.
ISO 800, f16.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike and Dan. Now, let's break down what we just saw. Here's what we'll be going over. Equipment, what you'll need, how to set it all up, getting the shot, the capture, and then processing it, which will bring out the details in the image. Here's what we'll need to make this all happen. You're going to need a source of smoke, a camera and lens that we can set to manual, some kind of a light source, and a few optional items that'll make things a little more helpful. A steady source of smoke is helpful. Now, I've gotten a few smoky shots using matches, but the effect is short-lived and the plume is not very large. The most common and reliable source of smoke is incense. They come in sticks and cones, and you can find them in many places. Even stores such as Dollar Tree. And nice smelling stuff is a must. Now that we have the smoke, the proper setting is important. You saw in the video how fickle the smoke plume can be and how the slightest air movement can affect it. This makes for some interesting shots, but it needs to be controlled. Additionally, you're going to need some distance between your subject and the background. This keeps the background as dark, that is black, as possible. More on this in the setting it up section. A couple of things about your camera. First, you want to make sure that you can set your camera to manual focus. This may also be done on the lens. For best results, you will need to be able to have the flash off the camera and to be able to trigger that flash remotely. More on that in just a bit. As far as your lens choice goes, a medium focal length telephoto lens around 75 millimeters and up will help keep the frame filled with your subject. I've been told that a macro lens, or as Nikon calls them, micros, are very useful. That's because they are built to allow for closer focusing. Some lenses allow you to switch between manual and autofocus. Stabilization settings. Some cameras have it in body, and some have to make the setting on the lens. Regardless, make sure you have them set correctly. If your camera is mounted on a tripod, set it properly. In the video, Mike demonstrated using a flash, and that seems to work the best. I did try using a continuous light and got a couple semi-usable captures, but nothing I was really excited about. If you're going to do this with continuous light, you need a lot of bright light. The thing you want to look for is the lumens rating. Where I got my results was using a high lumen, 3200 lumen bulb with a 5000 Kelvin daylight equivalency. A flash or strobe gives much better results. This can either be an external speedlight or a studio strobe of some sort. You'll need a way to support that flash and a way to trigger them. Supporting the flash can be done with tripods, light stands, flexible grips, or even the foot attachment that comes with most speedlights these days. And remember, continuous lights need support too, and we'll talk about how to position the light in just a little bit. But in addition to supporting it, you will somehow need a way to trigger it to capture the image. Many camera bodies and speedlights now have built-in infrared, IR, or radio frequency, RF triggers. There are also third-party RF triggers available, and dumb optical triggers that just fire off from another flash. Sync cords of various types are available also. You could even have a pretty dark room, set your camera to bulb, that is, open the shutter, and then manually pop the flash. We already talked about using something to support the flash, and that's where the light stands come in. And setting your camera on a tripod helps to keep you from having to refocus and recompose your shots. Mike talked about manual focus, so the extra light can help if your room is a little dark. I usually turn it off when I'm ready to shoot, but I've had good results either way. A little farther along in the presentation, I'll show you a way to help with the focusing aspect. So gathering it all up, you should now have a source of smoke, some incense, that is, either a stick or a cone, and remember to have nice smelling stuff, a proper setting which gives you enough room to work, and still air so you can control the drift, a camera and lens that you can set to manual and trigger an off-camera flash, some kind of a light source. Remember, best results come from speed lights or flash as strobe. And optional items that help include a tripod, light stands, and a focusing light. Okay, with everything gathered up, it's time to get it all set in place. In this section, we'll look at the background, the positioning of the smoke source, and the positioning of the light source. You'll want to keep your background as plain and as dark as possible. A black backdrop helps to provide a good contrast between the smoke and the background. Also, you'll want to allow a good amount of separation as possible between the background and the smoke. This will help keep the background underexposed, and we'll look at a few tips when we place the lights to help this. Position the source of your smoke at a comfortable level for your shooting, that's sitting or standing. And since the smoke tends to rise, you'll want to give yourself enough room for the patterns and swirls to form. Generally, you will want to set the light source to the side of the smoke plume or even slightly above it. Set it up about 4 to 5 feet from the smoke plume. This will help keep the light from spilling directly into your lens and will also keep the light off your background. That's why we want a good subject to background separation. Properly placing the light source is important if you want to keep the background dark. And here's why. Light from even a small speed light has a wide spread. This can be lessened by using the zoom function of the flash. I like to control the flash via manual control. If you're using RF or dumb optical triggers, set the flash to manual at about quarter power to start. I usually use the built-in infrared controls and use the same settings. You may need to adjust the power setting and or distance to suit your needs and exposure. If you don't have a lot of room, it may be necessary to flag the light source. A flag is simply some material such as cardboard, foam core, etc. to keep light from spilling onto the background. Here I'm using a small piece of foam core held on with rubber bands. With everything assembled and set up, it's time to get the shot. Here we'll look at some focusing techniques and look at some exposure settings. You will generally get best results by sticking with manual focus, and it can help to set a focusing aid in place. Just remember to remove it before taking the shots. Again, a helpful option is using a tripod to keep the subject to camera distance constant. For exposure, the mode you want to work with is manual. It works best so that you can control the depth of field via the aperture setting due to the drift of the smoke plume. Aperture mode also works well for the same reason. Regarding ISO, you want to keep your ISO as close to your camera's native ISO as possible. Native ISO is the camera's lowest ISO setting before it goes to the low X indicators. For example, my Nikon D300's native ISO is 200, while my D750's ISO is 100. This helps to keep the digital noise out of your image and your blacks as black as possible. Note the example chart here is simply an example to illustrate how digital noise shows up. An aperture setting around f11 will give you enough depth of field to account for the inherent drift in the smoke plume. The burst of the flash is what will stop the motion of the smoke, and using a flash in this way is what controls the exposure of the subject, the smoke plume that is. Remember, you may need to adjust the flash power setting and or the distance to suit the needs of your exposure. You want to keep the shutter speed fast enough to keep the ambient light down and your background dark. Be careful though to stay under your camera's flash sync speed. This will show up in your image as a dark area on the frame. Now on to processing your images to really bring out the best. Here you can experiment with cropping, vertical or horizontal formats, or color toning. Watch now as Mike shows Dan some processing techniques.
Okay, now we've got some smoke shot. Now we want to maybe mess around with it, change the color of the smoke a little bit, and that's pretty easy to do. First thing I wanted to do is open up Photoshop. I'm going to show how to do this in Photoshop. First we got to get a file, so I'll go to Open, go down here, and I know I got a couple of images here. Here's one here. So I open it up, and I open it up. Since I shot it in RAW, it opens up in the RAW converter. So at this point, what I can do is I can look at it and say, yeah, my contrast is okay. I think my background looks a little gray in here. So if I take my shadows and kind of just bump them down just a little bit here, bring the blacks down just a little bit. I just want that background to be black, okay? So I can go in here and maybe bump my highlights up a little bit more just to make them a little brighter. Too much, don't want to mess around with it too much. Bring my clarity over just to kind of sharpen it a little bit. At this point I could just add a little vibrance to it.
maybe bring the saturation up a little bit just to kind of, you know, make it look as best I can before I bring it into Photoshop. So we'll open up the image. Now, one thing that I don't like about here, and you can see in here, are these little wisps of smoke that were off. They caught a little bit of light, but they're kind of distracting. They're just kind of dark. So if I go over and open up the spot healing brush, I can go in here and just take and just kind of bring those down, just kind of get rid of them. And maybe a little bit in here. Looks like there's some stuff up in here. There we go. I think that'll probably work for what I need. Okay, so at this point, I think maybe I'll add a little bit more sharpness here. Go to sharpen, unsharp mask, kind of where I've got a little bit of detail, and I can kind of see in there. It doesn't look too bad, but let's 79% maybe a little bit too much, so let's just bring it back maybe to 50. That's probably pretty good. You can kind of see if you put the hand in here and click, you can see the sharpness kind of goes away. It's kind of a little preview for that. So hit OK. So that looks pretty good, nice and sharp. At this point, I could go in here and I could say crop it. Maybe I don't want quite as much in the bottom here, so I'll go in here and just kind of crop it down. Whoop, this, just because this is the more interesting part of the smoke, is up here in the top. So we'll just crop it out like that. So that makes it a little bigger, makes it a little more interesting. So at this point, I can take and color the smoke, and it's real easy to color the smoke. Go to Image, to Adjust, bring up the hue and saturation box. Now to change the color, it's sort of a kind of a blue neutral, white kind of color in here. It's not too exciting. If I take the hue slider and slide it over this way, can make it a little more blue, then a little violet, and kind of get in here to more magenta, kind of a red, into the red area kind of thing. Or if I slide it back the other way, through the blue into the green, kind of make it green and more yellowy and kind of orangey over this way. So I got kind of an unlimited amount of colors I can pick. We'll go back over this way, kind of see what we got over here. Let's get kind of a magenta color here. The thing about it is I got the color in here, but to me it's not quite intense enough. So if I take the slider here, the saturation slider, and slide it over here, I can bring it over and I can make that color a little bit more intense. So it's pretty good. I'm going to call that good right there. I can see still a few little wispy smokes here, like in here and stuff. Whoops. So I'll go back to my my spot healing brush and kind of fix that. Just to kind of, I don't know. Most people it probably wouldn't bother, but it bothered me. So anyway, this version I would probably call this done. But let's say I don't really care for the black background. It's real easy to make it white by going up underneath Image and Adjustments and down here to Invert. And what it'll do is it'll change the black background into white. But you also notice it also inverts whatever color you have. So now instead of a magenta smoke, we got kind of a green color. But if I want to bring the magenta back, it's real easy. Just go back under Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and then I can slide it over and get back to kind of where I was at here if I want the magenta on the white. So it's that simple. I see here I didn't quite clean up all this smoke here, but we'll just, like I say, the spot healing brush, and we can kind of take that out and this point too, we can go in here and make that under adjustments. If we go to levels, we can make that white background a little pop a little bit more by bringing the highlights up a little bit. Bring our shadows, and we can kind of bump our contrast up too a little bit that way, and then kind of adjust the midtones. It kind of helps with some of the detail in here. Just kind of makes it a little cleaner look. So it's that simple.
And now here are some finished examples. Remember to gather up all your equipment, set it up, get the settings on your camera and your flash right, and then process the images to bring out all the big details. A big thanks to Mike Mitchell and Dan Sack on this project. The second Tuesday Photo Huddle functions to bring folks together to explore and talk about photography in all expressions. Remember, the West Michigan Photography Enthusiast Meetup Group is sponsored by the Southwestern Michigan Council of Camera Clubs, SWMC, SWMCCC. Check out the webpage, swimc.org, for more events and connections to various affiliated clubs. I hope you enjoy getting creative with imaging, and thanks for watching.